Hello and welcome to this review session on Section 1 of D293, Evaluating Assessment Alignment. My name is Dr. Dan Barancata. I am here with you as one of the course instructors in this program and happy to just go over a nice review here of Section 1 to highlight some of the key terms, concepts, and information. This is by no means meant to be a replacement of the course of study, so do be sure to lean into those resources, the links, the articles, the videos that are in the course of study as you work your way through each of the 4 sections in this course. But today we're just going to kind of cover the key points and ideas here. And as you work your way through section 1 and really throughout this entire course, we want to make sure that we're thinking about the purpose and the goals of assessments. And I think it's really important that we view our assessments as more than just a grade. Whenever we're creating an assessment, putting grading and providing feedback on those assessments, we want these assessments to be learning experiences where we can continue the learning process for our students and continue to help the learning throughout so we can continue to grow and improve. So when we're planning assessments, when we're giving assessments, we have an opportunity to do a few things here that can really help support that goal of learning for our learners. We want to first always realize that an assessment is an opportunity for our students or our learners to summarize their learning, and that can occur at any point in time. So that could be after a short lesson, a unit, or an entire class, whatever it might be. We're trying to give our students and our learners a chance to demonstrate what they have learned to that point through an assessment. It also gives us a great opportunity to gather evidence about where our learners are at. What do they know? What do they need to improve on? Are there strengths and weaknesses here? Remember, all of our learners are going to be different. How can we differentiate that instruction and personalize that instruction so that we're keeping learners engaged and moving forward towards those learning goals and objectives? And then all of our assessments provide us an opportunity to generate data and feedback about our learning experiences and about our assessments. So take what you're learning from these assessments and make those important inferences and understand that, if students are struggling on a particular question on a test, maybe there's a better way to ask that question, or even better, a better way to teach and prepare our students to be to possess that knowledge, skill, or ability that's required to answer that question correctly. So we want to always be iterating and changing and making improvements in our courses. That's a key focal point of instructional design. And based on how our students are performing and the feedback that we get from them, whether that's explicitly or it's something that we're inferring implicitly here, we want to make sure we're using that information to help us continue to make better learning experiences and better assessments. When we're putting our assessments together and we're deciding what we want to do and what we're trying to accomplish, it's important that we ask ourselves a few questions. I always like to think of myself here sitting at my desk with my assessment wall just to the left of me here. And on that assessment wall, I have a series of shelves. Then I have some buckets on those shelves, and within those buckets, I've got a few others that I can pull out. So when I'm trying to decide how am I going to create this assessment, I first want to think about my learning goal and the objective that I'm trying to assess, because we want to see alignment in everything we do as instructional designers. So it's important that we have the right type of assessment that aligns with that learning objective. If we're asking students to do something, learners to do something, if that's the goal and objective, we need to have a task and an assessment where we can observe if they're able to do that. So we'll start by selecting our assessment type, and I like to think of those as the shelf. Those are going to be things like diagnostic, formative, summative assessments, and they're going to really be dependent upon what's the main goal of this assessment that we're using. Are we trying to measure student learning? Are we doing this assessment for student learning, or is it a chance to summarize student learning? And once we know which assessment type that we're going to use, then we can get to work selecting one of the buckets off that shelf. And the buckets are going to be those assessment strategies. Again, these aren't as broad as the shelf, but they're still a broader sort of context. And this is what of assessments. So these are going to be the different types of assessments that we're going to be using here. These strategies are what we're trying to assess. And that's going to be things like competency-based, norm referenced, or criterion referenced, and more. And we're going to talk about these again in a minute here. And then once I have the appropriate bucket down off the shelf, then I can really get to work on picking my specific assessment method. And again, this is going to be how are we going to do this assessment? And we want to make sure this method aligns well with our particular learning goal and objective. So here we're going to select something like a discussion board, a project, a multiple choice test, whatever's going to fit and align best with what we're trying to determine. Of those assessment types, we have the diagnostic, formative, and summative. And again, these are our shelves on that wall. The diagnostic, if you think just like the term diagnose here, we're trying to understand where our learners are at. Just like when you go to the doctor's office, the doctor will try to diagnose you. And once you have a diagnosis, then it's a little bit easier to treat because we're treating for a particular ailment or illness. That diagnosis can help us give the most efficient treatment in the medical field, and a diagnosis can do the same thing here within assessments. If we can use a diagnostic assessment, a pre-assessment perhaps, to determine where our learners are at as individuals, we can then prescribe and move forward the best type of learning activities for them to grow and stay engaged in the coursework. While we're teaching, we want to make use of frequent formative assessments. And formative assessments allow us to form an understanding of student learning, and we do this for student learning. Well, and this is always going to be occurring during the instruction. So throughout the instructional process, throughout our teaching and throughout the learning process for our learners, we're using these formative assessments to check in and see where they're at. What are they learning well? What are they struggling with? Are we ready to move on? Do we need to circle back and cover something again? How can we keep our students engaged and learning in that very individualized approach? And formative assessments allow us to do that. And then we have summative assessments, and summative assessments are an opportunity for students to summarize their learning, and we do this in summary of the instruction and of the learning. So this is going to occur after our particular block of instruction on a particular learning goal and objective. So this could be something that's a summative assessment at the end of one day of instruction, 1 month, or 1 year. Whenever that end of instruction occurs towards a particular learning goal and objective, and we want to see if that's been achieved, that's when we're going to use a summative assessment. And once we know which type we want, then we can get towards picking our assessment strategies. And assessment strategies are going to be, again, bigger ideas here. These are going to be things like traditional assessments, which is exactly what you might be thinking. It's a more traditional style assessment. These are going to be things like multiple choice questions, true, false, really where there's just a right and a wrong answer is going to be a traditional assessment. So there's a lot of emphasis here on memorization, and we've got a single right answer for each of these questions. We also have ipsative strategies, and when we see ipsative, that's all about a measurement of student learning over time. I always like to think of the I in ipsative as a ruler, and if we were going to use a ruler, we have to have a starting point and an ending point, and what we're after is that distance traveled, if you will. How much has somebody learned? How much have they grown? How much is left to continue to grow? So we can do this by using things like learning journals where we're reading through at different dates and times and seeing that progression of learning. Or we might compare two test scores like a pre and a post test, and then we're after that change that is occurring in the middle, how far our students have come. Because we know no students starting at the same place and they're not necessarily going to end at the same place either. Let's see how far they've traveled and how much they've learned. Then we have norm reference assessment strategies. And I like to think of this sometimes as what's normal. And I use that in figure quotes because what is normal is always changing. But what we mean by that is what's sort of normal for a particular group that we're looking at. So we're after here is to compare student performance against their peers. So we're going to take into account how others are performing on a particular assessment. These can be things like establishing a class ranking, where the ranking is, 1, 2, 3, 4, and so on, based on how you perform against your classmates, and it's not tied to a particular percentage or grade level score. We also might use things like bell curves to sort of standardize and compare to other folks to put that essential curve into a test so that it's, again, that comparison is occurring. How others perform impacts how you're being assessed here. And we also have criterion reference, and criterion reference is all about criteria. So very specific criteria is set and it's predetermined, and this is all about meeting that criterion. And the way we can sort of establish that criteria is through standards-based assessments, where we're going to evaluate a specific standard or a specific criteria here, and we want our assessment to line up directly with that, and that's what the learner needs to achieve, and that's what they're going to be graded and assessed on, is their ability as it relates to a particular standard learning goal or objective. And then we also have competency-based, which is really going to be putting a heavy focus on the real-world application here of student learning, and that they've mastered that material and they're able to demonstrate that. I like to think of these two, normative referenced and criterion referenced, as if we were going to be opening up a flight school and training pilots. If it was norm referenced, we might say our 7 best pilots are going to graduate and earn their pilot wings. Doesn't matter if they're all really good or if they're all not so good. We're taking the 70% or 7 of 10 best pilots here, and those are the ones that are going to move on. Where criterion reference would be, we've got a criteria that each pilot, in order to graduate, needs to be able to take off, fly, and land a plane. If you can do all 3 of those things, you're going to pass. Doesn't matter if there's 10 or 1 of those students, but it's about meeting that criteria. Then we have assessment methods, and the two main ones here are direct and indirect. And just like you might infer from the terms, direct is when we're directly going to be assessing students' knowledge, skills, or ability as it relates to a task that they're performing. So we're giving students a task, we're asking them something to do, so we can directly see this and determine if they in fact have met that learning goal or objective. So if we might have a learning goal or objective around creating a readable and usable resume, a direct assessment might be asking the students to create that resume, and then we can view what they've done, see their work, and assess it based on their ability to create a resume. An indirect assessment would be sort of a way to determine what student learning is without them actually completing a specific task that we're going to assess. So, an indirect assessment here can be things like interviews, surveys, check for understanding questions, or reviewing maybe some analytics packages from a learning management system or attendance reports to see if students have been there. So, if again we have a learning goal or objective about resumes, we might ask the students, do you feel like you can write a resume tomorrow? What have you learned about writing a resume? So we're not asking them to actually create the resume, but they're going to reflect on that process, and we'll judge their ability to create the resume based on their response. We might also lean into that LMS data to say, okay, this student spent an hour on the resume page, they know what they're doing, or this other student didn't visit it. I might assess and determine that they don't know how to create a resume. We also want to make sure that our assessments are always lining up with the appropriate learning domain as well. So whatever that goal or objective is after, we want to make sure an assessment is asking students to align that and to be in that same domain to demonstrate those same particular skills and abilities and the knowledge that we're after. So again, here the root words are important. If we think of cognitive skills, we can think of cognition. Cognition means thinking. So in this domain, we're all about problem solving, critical thinking, and it's a very sort of step-by-step methodical process where we're using a lot of brain power here. We have the affective skills domain, and I like to think here of the term affection, so we can think about emotion. This is going to be very much about interpersonal development, peer-to-peer interactions, and your overall feeling of something. Are you feeling confident and prepared and ready and willing and able to do this? And then finally, the psychomotor skills, where again here we've got motor, and if we think of motor, we're thinking of moving and doing and being hands-on. This is going to be that physical activity portion of it, where we're actually creating things and we're doing things in a physical nature here. We want to make sure that our assessment methods are always supporting learning. So again, we talk about those learning objectives. We start with that learning objective, and then we're ultimately trying to create the best assessment to measure that learning objective. So a few examples here. If we start with the first one, the objective is learners will be able to demonstrate a knowledge of World War II. So we're asking our learners to demonstrate sort of this overall broad knowledge of World War II. Well, there's so much there that we could test. How could we possibly assess all of that knowledge on World War II? Well, let's try to go maybe with a chapter test and more of a comprehensive type in traditional method here, where we can have multiple choice questions that touch on various areas of World War II, so our students are able to demonstrate if they do in fact have that sort of broad knowledge of World War II. But if we move towards the bottom, where learners will be able to apply engineering principles, now we're asking our learners to actually apply what they learned. We want to see them actually doing something here. So now it might be more appropriate to use a project-based assessment where we ask our learners to actually build a stick bridge, so they have an opportunity to apply their learning into a new skill or topic or idea here, and that would be creating that bridge. Bloom's taxonomy is such a key point in trying to help with our assessments, to help us scaffold and prepare our students for our assessments, but also align our assessments to our learning goals and objectives. So I always like to use this particular graphic here with Bloom's taxonomy for a few reasons. I think first off, it's important to recognize the pyramid type approach of Bloom's taxonomy. We have to start at the bottom and at the ground level when we're building a pyramid. And we want to do the same thing within Bloom's taxonomy. That's just how we're going to learn. We're going to continue to build our knowledge and build that and lay that upon brick by brick, moving up just like we would a pyramid. And that's really the way that we learn. And we also learn how to move as humans in that same way. We have to crawl first, then we can walk, and then we can run. We don't ask babies to start running right away before they walk and crawl, and it's for good reason. We have to be prepared and ready to do those higher level skills and abilities. Same thing here when we're thinking about our knowledge and our learning. We want to start off at the ground floor and build our way to the top. Within each of these levels, we're after sort of this big idea here. What are we tasking our students to do? And we can spend a lot of time trying to look at and memorize and understand all of the verbs that might come in some of these very comprehensive lists for Bloom's taxonomy. And those verbs are important, don't get me wrong. But for the most part, you're going to know what each of those verbs mean. You have a good understanding of the English language here, and you're going to understand what these verbs mean. So rather than spending all that time trying to memorize which verb goes where, ultimately some of those verbs can go in different levels depending on the context that they're used. We want to instead focus on that overall context. So if you focus here to the right of the pyramid where there's that phrase for remember, we're recalling facts and basic concepts. That's what you want to think about and remember for the remember level. It's going to be that basic understanding where we're able to recall those skills, the concepts that we're learning. We're doing things like defining terms or listing terms. We've memorized sort of that first level. Then we'll move up to understand, which is where we're going to start to explain that. So we can remember these terms, and now we're going to start to explain to somebody. We can have a discussion on it. We're going to recognize when that topic or term is being used, and we can start to have more of that conversational type idea here in this level. And then we'll move to apply, where we're going to use and apply that information that we've learned into a new situation. So this is an opportunity for us to demonstrate that we have in fact learned something because we're taking that skill or ability and we're transferring it into a new facet of our learning and we're applying it in that new situation. And then we'll move to the analyze level where we're trying to really connect different ideas and we're going to recognize differences and similarities here. We can compare and we can contrast. We're going to make sure that we're examining, thinking critically here at the analyze, and we're going to start to really think about how this is playing here and how it impacts other areas of this particular content. And then we'll get to the evaluate stage where we're truly making that evaluation. We're justifying a stand or a decision. So we're going to make a choice, we're going to make a decision here, and we're going to be ready to defend that. We're making that selection and we're able to support that. And we can weigh different options here, and we're going to decide what's best and how to use something here. And then ultimately we'll get to that create level, which is where you've achieved all these other levels and now you're ready to actually create something new, something original, your own thoughts, your own production or artifact here. You're developing that, you're authoring that, you're investigating this problem, and you're going to solve the issue and the solution here with your creation. So again, we're going to be slowly working our way up, and it's important that we can handle each level before we move on to the next. And there will be some verbs again that can go within multiple different levels. So I always encourage you when you're thinking about Bloom's taxonomy here is to sort of zoom out. And we want to focus on the main idea here, not just the key word, not just the particular verb, but what's the main idea. So as you read through scenarios and you're thinking about Bloom's taxonomy, can we sort of simplify a scenario or simplify a task and put it into a few keywords with that really focus on what we're trying to accomplish? So if we have an example here where an objective states that learners are going to identify the differences among types of plants, we might see a keyword here being identify and think that identify is often used in the understand level because we're able to identify something. But here we're thinking about, okay, what is this objective actually asking? It's asking us to identify the differences among types of plants. So it's more than just identifying a plant, but we're going to talk about those differences. So we're sort of boosting it up a few levels here. So if we think about how could we reword this, how can we think about this big picture, we're actually asking our learners to differentiate among the types of plants. We're asking them to distinguish among the different types of plants. So this is more of an analyze level, and because we're, again, sort of doing something else here. We're doing more than just identifying something. We're at a higher level of thinking. We're trying to differentiate. We're trying to distinguish. And we're going to, even though we have that word identify used, we're doing something at a little bit of a higher level. So we want to focus on that full task and focus on the big idea of what we're trying to accomplish. I encourage you to make sure you reach out to your course instructor. If you have any further questions or you'd like some supplemental resources, remember to lean into the course's study and don't forget all those resources and course tips. Best of luck.